The crossbows are a ranged-based weapon that do require ammunition to use, which are very similar to things like bows. Now the thing is, they're just worse than bows. The crossbows are just worse than regular bows, and then the ballistas are just worse versions than the great bows. And the main reason being is because of the scalings. For some reason, the crossbows and ballistas don't get any scalings at all, which for the bows, at least they'll get things like a D scaling. So at these higher levels, the bows and great bows could just do way more damage, and also does have faster reloading animations. Because with the crossbows and ballistas, you have to like reload them, which does take some time, especially for the ballistas. It's just like a really long reloading animation. And in that time, you're better off just using like a regular bow or a great bow. And another downside that they have is that there is way more ammunition options for arrows compared to bolts. When you look at bolts or great bolts, they just don't have anywhere near as much in terms of like different status effect options or different damage type options compared to something like the arrows. But they do have a couple of different things that they have going for them that make them better than bows or great bows in some areas. And that's one is going to be its travel speed. The projectiles do typically like travel at a faster rate and sometimes even go further. But one other benefit that specifically the crossbows have is that you can use them one-handed. For things like bows, you have to two-hand them first before you're allowed to use it. Which that means you actually can just have your weapon just one-handed and equipped. And any single time that enemies get a bit further away from you, you can just hit them at a distance. And it might just do like a little bit of chip damage and help enemies not regenerate their poise. Now there still are going to be some downsides for this. One, it's going to be a crossbow, so it's going to do shit damage. There are other different types of skills in this game or other different types of projectile options that are just going to be way more efficient, way easier to actually land attacks and probably just do more damage as well. And also the effort of going to just buy all this ammunition can be a bit tedious as well. You have to pick up all these different cookbooks or have to go to merchants every now and then to stack up an ammunition. And also the most annoying thing is that there are no weapon skill options available to the crossbows or the ballistas. And you're stuck with things like kick. And if you have the crossbow in your left hand and you want to use your skill of your weapon, you can't. It's just going to default to using kick, which is extremely annoying. So yeah, for the most part, I wouldn't really ever bother using them. But we're still going to rank them all anyway. We are going to combine both the ballistas and the crossbows together because I'm not going to bother separating them because there's only 3 ballistas in the game. But yes, as always, it is just going to be for PvE, and yeah, let's get started. Starting off at the bottom, the Soldier's Crossbow, which this is the lowest damaging crossbow in the entire game, which to be the lowest damaging crossbow means that you're like unfathomably dog shit. Like crossbows in themselves already get shit damage, and to be the lowest damaging one is just a joke. Like the only benefit that this one does have is that it's one of the lightest with the lowest requirements, but it's not that much lighter with that much lower of a requirement to warrant it having such poor damage. Number 11, the light crossbow, which is basically the exact same deal as the soldier's crossbow in that it just sucks in terms of damage, and the only benefit is that it's a bit lighter with a bit less requirements, a bit higher than the soldier's crossbow and can get a bit more damage, but like there's no point of using it. Number 10, the CREPUS'S Black Key Crossbow, which this one actually is the lowest damaging based on this AR. Yes, it even gets less damage than the soldier's crossbow, but that actually does have the benefit of getting more range. So at these further distances, which typically you're going to be at when using crossbows, it's going to actually do more damage than things like the soldier's crossbow and the light crossbow. But the thing is, the damage is so bad to the point that these other different types of crossbows that just get way more damage are still going to outperform this one at those further distances. And it's like this one like weighs a whole bunch less or has way lower requirements. It actually gets like higher requirements than most of the crossbows in the game too. Number 9, the heavy crossbow, which this one actually does get some of the most damage, but it's not the most damage, and all crossbows basically work the exact same way. I don't know why a lot of these things didn't get like unique different types of ashes of war, or have like different things going for them, because yeah, this one is just not going to get as much damage as the arbalest. And yes, this one actually does have a bit lower requirements, so it could be good if you just didn't really have much strength or dexterity, and you could just go with this option as your offhand, but like I still don't really care because it's a crossbow. Number 8, the Full Moon Crossbow, which this one actually thankfully does work a little bit differently, as that it does have some split magic damage. Now, just like all the other crossbows, there is just no scalings at all. Like, I don't really know how you're going to have weapons with like requirements and not really have scalings alongside with them. Doesn't really make much sense. But yeah, the Full Moon Crossbow paired alongside some magic types of bolts can actually do some pretty respectable damage. Even alongside some holy bolts can do pretty well also. So yeah, when throwing on a bunch of different types of magic buffs, it can be like the highest damaging crossbow, but it still is going to be split damage. So when you do fight enemies more resistant to elemental damage, you're not going to really benefit as much, especially because like the regular physical types of bolts are just going to be best because they're doing piercing damage. So yeah, I still wouldn't really ever use it unless I feel like it fits the aesthetic of my build, because it does look really cool and it has a pretty cool reload animation too. Number 7, the Hand Ballista, which is the first ballista that's going to appear onto this list, and this one is going to be the worst one in terms of damage, but the trade-off being is that it is a bit lighter with a bit lower requirements, but it's not that much lighter or that much lower to warrant me wanting to use it over things like the jar cannon, which are just going to hit way harder. But even if it did have a specific use, I still wouldn't really care for it because great bows just outclass ballistas anyway. Number 6, the Arbalest, which actually is the hardest hitting out of all of the single shot crossbows in the game. So if you did want to have a traditional crossbow, this is probably the one to use. Now the downside being is that it does have 18 strength requirements. So it's not like you really can put it in the offhand with a dexterity type of build, but at least it does more damage than the other ones. Number 5, the jar cannon, which I consider this one to just be the upgraded version of the hand ballista due to it having just more damage. And it also does look pretty cool as well. But yes, hand ballistas, just not as good as great bows because there is no skill options and they have this really long reload animation, which you can actually cancel the reload animation if you actually do shoot it while standing on like a little bit of a ledge, because the recoil has you like step backwards a little bit and you fall down, and that can just cancel the entire animation. And you can keep firing it that way. Number 4, the repeating crossbow, which is one of the ones from the DLC. This one is getting pretty average damage compared to a lot of the other crossbows. But thankfully, this is actually one with a unique skill, which is the only one in the entire game. And the skill is going to be the only reason why it actually gets this high, because it does fire out like 8 arrows in quick succession. And if all of them hit, it actually can do a decent amount of damage. If you pair it alongside status effects, it could do like roughly 400 status buildup. Now the problem being is that the skill takes like a long time to come out, so that it's like a really long animation, and the damage is just really just not worth it, especially if you're fighting enemies like to move around, because the whole thing is just gonna miss. It consumes 27 FP, which is just way too much. Like, it already consumes a whole bunch of bolts. Why do I have to consume so much more FP on top of this? And just on top of that, it like drains your entire stamina bar. I don't know how like just pulling the trigger on a crossbow makes you drain your entire stamina bar. Like, I'm not even moving while using it, so I don't understand why it has to work this way. And also, if you wanted to know, it only gets like 1 stance damage per bullet as well. So like the entire combo just hits for like 8 stance damage if you do land every single bullet. So yeah, this thing is definitely in need of a buff. It needs to, 1, not consume anywhere near as much stamina, not consume as much FP, potentially just have it not take that long to charge up and just get to like the really fast part of the skill. And honestly, just crossbows in general just need to have like a flat damage buff. Every single one just needs to increase in damage and just probably just have scalings. Number 3, the spread crossbow. Now this crossbow gets like really low AR, but the reason why it gets really low AR is because every single bullet that it actually does fire out shoots out 10 at once in this like shotgun pellet spread animation. So this is going to be like the closest thing you actually have to a shotgun in this game. Now the thing is, the projectile still goes relatively far, and you only need to hit with one of the bullets just to do maximum damage. So it's not like you necessarily have to be at closer range, but it does get some pretty severe damage fall off, so being at closer ranges is going to be best. But the thing is, this is actually doing very respectable damage per hit, and it can just do some like boosted status effect build up too. And typically with crossbows, if you're fighting enemies like to dodge and move around, it's just gonna miss every single time because of the input reading or animation reading, and the spread crossbow can just completely negate that. Now the major downside is that it consumes 10 bolts per attack, which bolts are just annoying enough as it is to try and keep constantly buying them or crafting them over and over again. And with this thing, you're basically using it 10 times before you just run out of ammunition. So that is going to be like its major downside. Honestly, like the damage of this spread crossbow is what like every single crossbow should be doing in terms of damage. Like this should just well and true just be the best crossbow in the entire game, because it actually is really good on paper, but it's just way too expensive. At number 2, the pulley crossbow, which is like the highest damaging crossbow per hit if you don't include the spread crossbow, as this one actually does work very similar, but actually does shoot out 3 bolts in quick succession. And obviously the AR of the crossbow is really low to actually try and compensate for this quick little 3-hit attack. But the thing is, at least it actually does respectable damage. You can actually like freely use this at a distance, leave it in your offhand, just do okay damage, do okay status buildup. It's actually going to be a pretty okay offhand option, but like the obvious downside is that it still just consumes 3 bolts, which is much better than the 10 that the spread crossbow does. And you do get stuck in a longer animation compared to like a regular crossbow that just fires 1 bolt, and it's obviously not going to be anywhere near as efficient, but it's probably still the best bow to use in my opinion, as all the other ones are just like really frustrating in terms of their shitty damage or just consume way too many bolts. And that's number 1, we have the RABBATH'S cannon, which is one of the new ballistas from the DLC. This one working identical to the jar cannon in terms of its animation, but the differences being is that this one actually gets some split magic damage and actually has inherent tracking with the ballista itself. And the tracking on this thing is honestly insane. Like you can just aim this in a complete different direction and it could do like some 90-degree or 100-degree turn and just be like the most insane thing that you've ever seen. And the fact that it has this boosted tracking means that it goes a lot further than all the other ballistas too. Now, do I value it more so than like a great bow? Probably not, because those ones are going to be much faster to try and fire off, and you actually get different types of skill options that you can pair alongside with it, which I don't know why this thing didn't get like some type of cool, unique skill. And I did like the fact that they do try to make some different types of bows for the DLC, but they're still going to be very mediocre options, and half of these problems could be fixed if they just gave them scalings. Okay, that is the video now done. Wasn't going to spend too much time talking about these mediocre ass weapon types. But as for the next video, we are going to cover the staves, all 20 or 21 different staves, the staves, whatever you want to call them. We're going to be ranking those as we did just do the seals yesterday. But that's basically going to be the last of the weapon categories that we are going to touch on before we move on to some different types of videos. Anyway, catch you guys around. Bye.